who is the Test Automation Competence Manager in Quality Management Office. Alexander has over 13 years in IT industry and is well known for his exceptional expertise in quality management area. Today, he'll share with us a piece of his experience related to game testing. Alexander, I hope I didn't take much of your time. I know the presentation is huge. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Oleg. Thank you for introduction. First of all, let me share my screen. Okay, so let me know if you can see it. Great, so let's start. Yeah, so as Oleg mentioned, I'm working in a quality management office as a QMO competency manager. And my responsibility is only in test automation direction. And based on my experience, based on the services that recently appeared and I had chance of working on, I will share my experience and some insights regarding this topic. And also another goal why I choose this topic is actually, I am a hobbyist game developer. I'm doing game development in my free time. So as well, game development including game testing as well. And I know a kitchen a bit. So based on this activity and based on my experience at SoftServe, I want to share these insights with you. Okay, so what we will cover today, I want to touch today the gaming industry itself and want to try to explain you why the game testing is important and why the industry is growing. And we want to show you some challenges that I've personally faced with and that came to the gaming industry world and can appear when you will face with game testing. Also, we will try to share with you and we'll try to discuss with you some strategy which can be applied to game testing, some types of testing, how game testing differs from regular software testing. Also, we'll mention couple of tools that I've used, that I'm familiar with, and we'll try to inspire you how to become game tester, what you will need, how to start, etc., etc. So let's move on. Let's start, and I want to start from the gaming industry itself. And as you may know, gaming industry is a huge one. And the first game, technically commercial first game, was in the 1950s, but in the 1970s there was a huge rise of video games as a cultural phenomenon, and different companies started to produce in video games. And after decades to nowadays, the trends of the late 20s have shown steadily increasing market for video games. And new consoles appeared, new type of games appeared, some family-oriented games, and all these aspects moved on the industry. And also online games have continued to develop and growing the number of gamers and overall affect this industry. And nowadays we have such high quality games that you sometimes cannot understand if it's reality or if it's a gaming engine. So the progress is growing, and we see this progress and we are living inside this progress, and it's cool. Yeah, and what we have today, so the question. And before I reveal some current situation with gaming industry, I want to ask you a question. So can you please put a plus in the chat who playing games actually? And this is related to one of the most amazing insights that I prepared. So have you imagined then over 1/3 of the world's population are active gamers. So this is really huge market, and it's growing. And the global gaming market is worth more than $300 billion right now. So can you imagine how this industry is huge? And also, if talking about some regional aspects, so China and the US dominate the gaming market right now, and also in this time in the era of digital purchasing, so most of the game purchases are now made digitally, because as you remembered, a long time ago we bought some CDs, some cartridges to 8-bit system, but now we have digital markets, and we can buy easily a game or make some in-game purchase in the electronic shops. So it's too easy right now. And also gaming related to esports as well. And the global esports audience are set to rise about 500 million by the next few years, and by the 2024. And based on those insights, we see that industry is growing. And be it online, mobile, console, or PC games, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's not a child play. And as a result, expert-level game testing is extremely important for game success. And we see that it's growing, and we need more and more game testers right now. Before we move on, let's see how the game development lifecycle looks like. So this picture can be familiar for those who are working with the software development lifecycle, but it has a slightly difference. So we have three main stages. So first is pre-production stage. When you create some, when you have some idea, when you create some proof of concept, some prototype of your game, you pitch it to the publisher, because you can publish it by your own or publish using some third-party companies. You made some plans, some game design documents. So the first pre-production stage is idea verification. And after idea is improved, and after you found publisher, or you, I don't know, decided to create your own company, so you start development and implementation. So in this stage, in this production stage, so main logic is developing. So, and active coding phase is in progress. So, and this phase includes coding, integration of various modules, etc., etc. So game logic is in production stage. And after that, after production, there is a post-production phase. So if you have some stable product that you can push forward and you can test, so there is testing and deployment stages. On the testing stage, there are a couple of different type of testing. So some early one called play test, when you see the reaction of players, etc., etc., and also some other beta and professional tests, alpha, beta, golden, etc., etc. So there is a huge number of different testing activities regarding to game development. But after we pass this, so we move on to the deployment, release, and distribution of our game. Yeah, so for us and for this topic, we are interested to deep dive in this testing phase and to see how it works inside. And if we state the game testing itself, so what is game testing? It's actually a software testing process, because the game is a software. And this is software testing process for testing video games for quality control. It's obvious. And the main goal of game testing is to identify and discover defects and bugs in video game and improve the stability, performance, usability, etc., etc. And as I mentioned before, on the previous schema, game testing is a component of the game development lifecycle, and this component helps to ensure the video game to be deployed is bug-free. So it's playable, and we can move on with the distribution. But so you may ask, so if game testing is a software testing, so what is the difference? So in order to determine the quality of a product, you know that testing is important. And whatever it is, a software application or gaming application, both require testing to control and assure their quality. And testing not only verifies the quality and readiness of the application to be launched, but also enhances its productivity. And while the objective of testing remain the same, there exists a number of differences actually between software and gaming testing. And I want to mention a couple of those, not all, but the more important one. So first one is complexity. So in terms of complexity, game testing is more complex in comparison to software testing. While software testing follows a systematic approach and it's relatively simple, game testing involves a lot of complexities, a lot of additional tools, a lot of additional methodologies. So game testing may seem to be a fun task, but it is actually more complex, and it requires paying attention to minute details, to a lot of concentration, as well as dedication in order to enhance the quality of gaming application. Next difference is test automation. So as I am working with test automation closely, so I know that while game testing does not involve much test automation, so software testing uses it into a large scale. Because as I mentioned before, games is more complex software products. It's not obvious and easy way to implement automation into the game testing. And mostly game testing involves a lot of engineers and a lot of manual testing, but automation scripts are also present. However, software testing heavily relies on the automation scripts, but on the game testing, those scripts can be as a additional piece of testing, not something that we can rely on. And based on that, as I mentioned before, so you need a huge number of testing, a huge number of testers. So testing teams are also differs, because when we test in the games, we need a huge teams, a huge separate teams with which can test different gaming aspects that I will mention a bit later. But the most difference here, it's a number of engineers that you need to involve. Another difference is platforms. So as you may know, nowadays, games made for huge number of different platforms. And if we're talking about typical software products, we have some regular platforms, PC, we have I don't know, web version, desktop version, mobile version of applications. Also, we have some embedded devices, etc., etc. But if we're talking about games, there is a huge number of different platforms for different vendors. You know, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, etc., etc. So we need to test those games in all of those platforms. And last but not least is expertise. As I mentioned before, it's related to complexity. So to test some complex gaming products, we need a huge expertise, and we need to wide expertise, especially if we're talking about some virtual reality headset game testing or console game testing. So there is a lot of tools and programming complexes that require a huge expertise to that. So basically these are main difference, how we differ software and game testing. But as I mentioned before, I want to share with you some challenges that I faced before and that can appear while you try to test games. So for you to be prepared for these challenges, I want to describe a bit what you can expect. So the first challenge is testing games across various game engines. So imagine I mentioned a huge number of platforms, And also for each platform, there is a huge number of game engines. So it is said that choosing a right game engine frequently proved to be a first step in deciding the success of or failure of the game. Because if the type of a game is a family game, it's better to choose the Nintendo platform where you can use some fancy gadgets and fancy controllers. Yeah, if we're talking about some simple and casual games, so the best platforms can be some portable platforms, for example, Steam Deck or Nintendo Switch or mobile phones. Yeah, and each of those platforms so can multiply by number of engines. There is a different engines and different engines for different platforms and different complexity. And the most popular nowadays is the Unity engine and Unreal Engine. If we're talking about Unreal Engine, is more complex product and it's used for AAA games, for games with a huge budget. And this type of engine really required a huge expertise, even not for developing, but for testing those games, because I will mention it on the next slide. So if you use some particular engine, you can use some particular tools produced by this engine for testing purposes. And Unreal Engine, so it's Epic Game Studios produced a lot of instruments and you need to have a huge expertise to use them. And if we are talking about some independent game developers or about game developers who want to quick start and to present his idea, there is a Unity engine. It's more simple and it has a more user-friendly interface and you can deep dive more quickly. Yeah, so, and the challenge is when you have a game and you need to test it, it depends which engine it used. So you should expect it. The next challenge is testing multiplayer features. So this can be a big challenge, particularly when players are emulated on, or when the players aren't in the same room, or rather playing from the whole different geographies. So multiplayer games are very challenging to test and tough to debug. And those games can contain issues that are nearly impossible to break. And to mitigate this challenge, the game should be made sure for its robust design and to be sure that all the game logic is perfectly working. So, but from the other side, some talking about previous slides, so some best game development frameworks like Unity and Unreal. So they have its own functionality built in, and this functionality has been unit tested and it has a proven stability. So you can rely on those functionality that's made for multiplayer feature implementation and testing. Another challenge is authentication challenge. So if you played a lot of games, you know that each huge company has its own system to authenticate. So it is never forgettable to have an insecure authentication system, because no gamer would ever want to break their safes. Or I don't know, imagine after spending sessions, thousands of hours of playing games, spending, I don't know, huge amount of money for buying some, I don't know, in-game items. And after this, some, I don't know, credentials or some accounts are broken and you lost everything that you had. And there is a couple of such issues, and this is so this is really important thing, and you definitely need to pay attention to those authentication system and how they work and if they work correctly. Okay, the next challenge is ensuring accurate social integration. So I don't think so that it's so popular right now, but a couple of years ago, it was really a huge popularity of this function when you can share right from the game some information into social networks. But actually, if you're talking about social media, they can be a double-edged sword, if you will. So if we use this social media in the right way, it can bring together similar gamers into some communities, into some groups, or it can be a great way for the companies to push their products. I don't know, some gaming accessories, weapons, gears, etc., etc. However, but if it done poorly, it can, I don't know, it can be the end of your game and of your gaming studio, because as a game testers, you need to make sure that the social integration is accurate and it's not annoying and it's work correctly. So this is also a very valuable challenge. And another, my favorite, because I faced with this, actually is testing in virtual or augmented reality using these headsets. So actually, there is, I guess, three main challenges for this topic. So first is motion sickness. So VR motion sickness actually exists, and it's one of the biggest issues that QC engineers have to deal with, despite the fact that some people more prone to these effects, but this can happen. Another one is working with documentation. So imagine that you using this headset and you need to go step by step into some checklist or open some documentation and see some text files, walkthroughs, test plans, etc., etc. So it can be a challenge. And also another thing is personal feelings, UI, and usability. So for particular engineer, everything can be okay and great, but for other people, it depends on personality. It can feel different. So personal opinion is also a big challenge in this topic. Yeah, so basically knowing those challenges, knowing that you can face with another big step, so is to prepare your testing strategy. So like any other step in the game development process, game testing requires some planning so that the result obtained as great as possible. And the role of strategic planning is to identify possible problems in the game testing process and possible scenarios to combat them, so that positive results are easy to obtain as possible. Also, in the planning phase of the game testing strategy, the role of team members, the team composition, the tools, the documentation that will be used should be established before. So you can predict what will be next, you can define the next stages, and you can use all the income information, all the requirements that you will utilize in this testing strategy. And one tip, so in order for the results to be as good as possible, try to make the planning as detailed and rigid as possible, and in the earliest stages. So to have all the details and to have all the information how it should be executed. So basically talking about strategy and talking about types of testing that you can face with, let's proceed with this. So first of all, the most important type of testing, it's functional testing, because you need to test the functionality itself. And it's actually required to look for generic problems within the game or its user interface and graphics. So such as game mechanics issues, stability issues, game asset integrity, etc., user interface testing, user friendliness of the game. So because something can be not so obvious and the game should communicate to the players. So you need to see that all the mechanics works and works as designed. So, and for example, this can be checking some, I don't know, art style, checking colors, background, some UI elements, menus, system navigation, loading time, etc., etc., etc. So a lot of stuff that related to basic functionality and how the game looks and feels. The next important thing is compatibility testing. So I know that some of these can be obvious for you, and you can compare it with the regular software testing, but I will try to figure out some aspect that differs this type of testing from the regular software testing. And the next is compatibility testing. And like in software testing, checking the game is compatible across different devices and on different configurations of hardware, software is also required. As I mentioned before, a lot of consoles, a lot of devices, a lot of configurations. For example, when some vendor producing the console, there is different types of this console. So more powerful, regular. For example, there is two versions of Xboxes, and one is more powerful, one is less powerful. There is a 3 version of Steam Deck with the different speed of SSD, something like that. So you need to be sure that your game is compatible with all those devices and it's running smoothly, and you will receive the best experience for this game. So as an example, simple example, you can install and check, and that's it. So if it supports all the resolutions, all the functionality of those devices, etc., etc. The next thing is compliance testing. So actually, it includes some marketplace guidelines compliance, for example, Apple App Store policies or Google Play Market policies, enterprise policies compliance, etc., etc. Also content rating system, because before you publish your game, you need to know if your game has some prohibited content, violence, I don't know, drugs, gambling, etc., etc. And also there is some technical compatibility testing. For example, if the game is published to European countries, it should work with the PAL standards, or if it's published to Northern America, it should work with NTSC standard. It's conversation standard, which includes different frame rates, different aspect ratios, etc., etc. So it's also compatibility testing, depending on the regional. Depending on the region where you publish your game. Another thing is localization. So it's really important for gamers to have its own localization, and it becomes essential important when the game is targeted for the global markets. When we're talking about localization, there is a lot of stuff that you can check and that you can test, starting from game titles, content itself, some text boxes, etc., etc. But especially like for software, for gaming, there is also a lot of different challenges. For example, localization for different regions, for example, Arabic localization, right to left text support, bidirectional displays, pseudo localization testing, and etc., etc. So also you should use local time and dates, use currencies, addresses, formats, etc. Because for modern games, you need to create your account to fill all your data, your payment details, all the information about you, and also this should be tested in scope of localization testing as well. And another thing is voice localization testing. It's more complex stuff, but it also includes into this area as well. Another important thing is SOC testing. Or I don't know, I call it stress testing. When you start the game, put the character in one pose and made it stand idle for 24 hours, for example. So this game testing, I guess it's automated somehow, because you don't need to do some actions and you can automatically start it and gather some statistic, gather logs and close it. And it involves leaving. So as I mentioned before, it involves leaving the game running for a prolonged period of time with different states. I don't know, idling, paused, or in the title screen, etc., etc. So it's also can catch some memory leaks, some resource management errors, etc., etc. Another thing that's related to stability is recovery testing. It's also like in SoftServe, recovery testing checks how well the application can be recovered from crashes. The example how you can check this, so you can just start a game and suddenly restart it, or unplug from the socket, or the best way to test games is to start gaming nowadays and at our situation, and when the blackout will come, so you will have some recovery testing. And I always have it with my PlayStation. So after the blackout, I'm turning on and see the state of my game, and from time to time some data can be lost, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on for more classic approaches and approaches that can be familiar for you. So white box testing is when it's the best case scenario when you have all the source code of your game, and you can do every aspect of white box testing, inspection of code, review, program logic, detect some common programming errors, etc., detect some chunks of code, data usage, different stuff that can be done when you have an access to the code base. So nothing new here. But another important thing, so not all of the games has support of these technologies, but the couple of AAA titles have it, and have it in the more wide implementation, but in more general implementation, a lot of games have it. So it calls this assistive gaming. This assistive gaming using adaptive technologies, and it's also known as accessibility gaming. And so features are designed using some adaptive technologies for individuals with various disabilities, like low vision, blurred vision, blindness, inability to distinguish colors, speech, hearing, etc., etc. So you can test the different approaches to challenge those aspects. So, for example, the colors should flash in a pattern, or some tones will play for each color, etc., etc. Yeah, or some voice will describe what is going on the screen. So this is the some additional part of testing, and it's depending of the adaptive technologies that implemented in the game, but it's also important, and you also need to understand how to test it and add this type of test into your strategy. Okay, so those basically are main parts that I wanted to mention that you should pay attention when you design your strategy document. But what about metrics? So as in software testing process, we collect a lot of metrics, right? But basically they related to defects, related to test automation, etc., etc. But game testing require even more. For example, daily active users or monthly active users. So the ratio of active users who play each day over the number of monthly active users, for example, or the time of sessions. So every time an user open the app, that counts of sessions starting, and you can analyze those metrics and then see the time windows when a player is playing your game. And here the focus on the average number of sessions per daily active user, for example. Download rank, also the rank of a game in a particular app, in particular platform. I mean App Store, for example, for iOS and Android Play, you see the percentage in which market the game is more popular and how many downloads you have. Some retention rates, very important metric for an Android game tester for free-to-play game, because if the game is free-to-play, you need to have the great retention, and to calculate retention, you need to separate the users into different categories and see how many of downloads they have. And also, and also performance metrics, some obvious metrics. It's for tracking performance. It's more important for online games, I guess. So frame rates, different aspects of hardware platforms, etc., etc. So you need to collect those metrics to track stability and performance for your game, and monitor the change in features and updates, and how it affects those updates and changes. Okay, so my favorite part is game testing tools. So I've tried to divide those tools into the different categories, and based on the type of a game that we will be testing with those tools. So actually, first category is a web-based and AI tools. And those can be implemented for simple casual gaming that are built in some web technologies. And the market trend for web technologies is Selenium, and for mobile is Appium, and you can leverage those tools, and based on that, build your own frameworks or use some ready-to-use solutions, especially AI-powered tools. And there is a couple of them that can use some AI and machine learning algorithms to improve the flows and to teach your framework how to identify objects, similar objects, different UI flows, etc., etc. So this is the simple way how to achieve automation while you're testing games, but it's not applicable for some AAA titles with the fancy 3D graphics. It's more about some, I don't know, web forms applications. It can be applied to some casino games that utilize some frameworks that can be recognizable at least by those tools. Yes, so if we have this simple type of games for children, some math games, some quests, etc., that have a simple UI, and that's based on some web technologies, so you can utilize those instruments for that. Another huge player on the market is out-of-the-box solution is a game driver. So unfortunately, for now, it's a commercial tool, but it's a really powerful tool, and you can test, for example, VR and XR application. It has its support. It has a game driver SDK for Unity platform, and it has a different, like we have for test automation, object recognition tool. It has its own object explorer utility, some recorders, advanced recorders, support for a huge number of platforms, support for real and virtual mobile devices. So you can test everything that you can imagine using this solution. Yeah, and it has the best object identification in the market, and it has multi-target device support, as I mentioned before. So it's a huge complex program solution that can be utilized, but as I mentioned before, it's a paid solution. Another thing, if we're talking about tools, so as I mentioned previously, it's tools based on the engines. For example, Unity engine has its own Unity test framework. So you can write some unit tests right inside the code of your game, and you can call different APIs, you can build different flows, you can do some low-level Unity tests, unit tests. I'm sorry, unit tests in Unity. Fun. Yeah. So also, but I mentioned this instrument because I've using this instrument, but I know that Unreal Engine also has some similar technology, but I didn't work with it, so I decided to not mention it. But for Unity, it's definitely there is a testing framework implemented by them. And another pack of tools is computer vision tools. Actually, I recently wrote an article from EA Games that they created some cool algorithms that works like in Tesla cars, that can detect different personages, that can move your character, that can jump, run, shoot, etc., etc. So based on the computer vision and based on AI and ML algorithms. So the game teach how to play itself. And then you can, based on the outcomes, you can build different testing flows and see how it performs. But if talk about more simple ways to achieve that, there is a couple of tools, TensorFlow and OpenCV library, that you can utilize and build your own framework to use image recognition to click on different icons. But I guess this approach will be suitable for mobile applications with the graphics or with the simple casual mobile games, etc., etc. But it has some cons and it has some downsides because it's not super stable and you should understand it. And another downside that you can put a lot of efforts to teach these algorithms to find some elements, or you need to put a lot of efforts to build those frameworks, but these solutions are also used. Yeah, so you can try to utilize them, not only for game testing, but for, I don't know, different software with the graphics rich interface when you cannot detect the elements in the regular way. Okay, so basically we know the challenges, we know how to create a strategy and which aspects you need to include into this strategy and which type of testing you will expect. And you know what tools can be used for that. But the main question, so actually the topic of this conversation is testing games. It's not playing games, but actually it is playing games, but with different circumstances. So knowing the kitchen, knowing the aspects of which types of testing you should expect, knowing the tools and approaches, the main question can appear how to become a game tester and what you need to know. So as a QC engineer or quality assurance technician in industry terms, you have to be an essential part of the development of the games and of releasing and distributive of these games. And you will be tasked with the responsibility of identifying and reporting bugs before the title is launched. So what this abstract person is, the game testers. So I prepared some advices to you, and it's not related to game testing especially, it's related to every direction that you will choose. But for game testing, you need to have some I don't know, some qualities of your person. So, for example, you need to play your strengths. So game testing is so much more than just playing games and finding bugs. And this is a good opportunity to find out and to see if you can do something in the different way and in the different direction. For example, if you are a good writer, you can express yourself. If you are a creative thinker, you can think outside of the box. If you see that you're working with art and art is yours, you can be a good artist and move to that direction. Or if you're a strong communicator, you can motivate and inspire people to be at their best every single day. So you can play to your strengths and you can develop yourself in the different areas. And this, especially direction, games development, games testing can help you to develop your strengths. Another thing is work hard and have fun. So make sure to find ways to ensure you are happy with that you are doing and how you are doing it. But it's not always working because, as I mentioned before, testing games is super repetitive process, and you can do the single scenario thousands of times, and it can be stressful. But try to find the fun ways how to challenge this. And talking about challenges, so prepare to challenge. It won't always to be easy. Be prepared for curveballs and to be especially ready to take ownership on the bigger calls. So you always need to be prepared for different challenges, and you need to be a team player. So video game testing can seem a very technical profession on the surface, but different skills are equally as important to help create a positive atmosphere and amongst your team. And you can always do the best to do that. Balance your perspective. It's important to see the game not only from player's point, but view also from developer point and from the client perspectives, because as I mentioned before, you should think outside of the box, and not always if game playing okay and the functional is working, it will be commercial success, because you need to go up and see from the other side to this game and general to industry. And the last is my favorite: you always need to stay up to date. So in my experience, knowledge of different game genres, franchise, trends help you with making you be a more rounded tester, and you be prepared for the different aspects of different games. So research, play, and also have fun with this. Yeah, so that was my recommendation, but you can have your own. But in general, that's it from my side. So I have a perfect timing. Yeah, so I guess it's time for your questions, if you had some.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alexander, for sharing your experience. Indeed, it touched vast majority of game testing aspects. And yeah, as Alexander mentioned, now we have a couple of minutes for the Q&A. If you have questions to Alexander, so write them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask them directly.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to ask you. So if some of you, I just forgot about this, but if some of you are already testing games and work with different tools mentioned or not mentioned in this presentation, just please write yes and the name of tools. So I want to see how many of you faced with the testing of the games and which tools you've used. So it will be interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You want to make filtering of the questions for me a bit harder, I believe. But we have a question from Oleg Prilepin in the chat. Thank you so much for an awesome speech. Are there some difference in tools, instruments for mobile devices and game consoles, or we have a chance to use one specific for both?
So thank you. It's a good question, and it depends which engine we use. So, for example, if you are using Unity engine, it supports all the major consoles, mobile devices, PC, Mac, Linux, so all the platforms that you can imagine. And for example, you implement one logic, so one test flow, for example, for your game, and you can run this one test flow into the all platforms. Yeah, and even though you can debug your game and your test using the real devices. Yeah, but if we're talking about some other solutions, so not based on some game engines, I don't know, handwritten solutions, for example, using some libraries. So it is on your shoulders to support multiple devices. And in this case, is more applicable strategy of regular test automation. So you design in your framework and you designing how particular flows running on different devices, because as you may know, in different operation systems, there are different controls if you're talking about controls. But if you're talking about some graphic elements and elements based elements that developed using some engine, it will be one approach, one test flow to all the devices.
Okay, another question is from Anna Hladka. If the game is not released yet, what metrics do you use, which specifics to game testing?
Yeah, so actually there is an approach how to gather not real metrics when your game is not in production yet. As I mentioned in the one of the challenges when you're testing, for example, multiplayer functionality, you need to define some virtual users with the different locations. And this process is similar to classic performance testing, but you need to gather the performance metrics and to see how your game is performing. Yeah, but unfortunately, you cannot gather some metrics that relate to the game popularity, the metrics from the platforms, I mean, Apple Store, Google Play, or whatever platform that you publish your game. So basically, you can collect some performance metrics and some emulated metrics from emulated users, but not real one if your game is not published yet.
Thank you. And another question is from Olga Krotova. Is there any specific approaches when you working at specialized on game testing, not developing company?
Maybe I need to more clarification about this question because I cannot understand it in correct way, I guess. Working specialized. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm understood this question like if you are outsourced game tester and you do not work in the game development company, correct? Ah, yeah, cool. So actually, I faced with such experience even recently, and it's a challenging and it's a challenge that I did not mention when you need to test a game, but you don't have a source code of this game. And this is a really challenging situation because you cannot implement all the white box techniques that I mentioned before. You cannot implement the game engine extension tools to test the code itself. All that you have, it's a single image of rendering your game. Yeah, so it's not something obvious how you can do that, but in different cases, I guess, when you're cooperating with other development company, they will share with you the code base, so you can apply the regular way of automated testing or some white box testing. But when you do not have a source code, the only option you have, it's image recognition. But as I mentioned before, it's not stable. And so I hope in the nearest future, the evolution of tools will allow us to test it, because I know that you know how the AI algorithms progressing right now with all those. I don't know if you know, there is some different interesting libraries that can generate art, and I also recently read an article that some game art very soon can be generated by those systems. So I guess the technologies that can recognize what's going on your screen also will evolve, and maybe in the near future we do not need a source code to test the game itself, I hope.
Great. Another question is from Yaroslav Tarashko. Is there a possibility to switch to game testing if you are a web UI tester with some training?
I think it's a matter of your willingness and of your motivation. I guess you can do that, and you can try with the more simpler games, some casual 2D games, and you can play with those tools that can use this. But actually, nothing will change a lot, but you will definitely need to master some additional stuff, how to test games. And talking about materials, so I will share with you a couple of recommended materials on the Udemy platform, and also you can read the documentation for those tools that I mentioned and move on from the. So the easiest way to move from the web testing is to casual 2D games that made with the web-based tools. But first of all, you need to understand how games work itself, and then you will switch tooling, or even implement some custom frameworks using the same tools that you use for web testing. But if we're talking about some AAA games testing that built on those engines that I mentioned, Unity or Unreal Engine, you definitely need to extend your knowledge and gain the expertise to work with those engines. But if one more thing that I wanted to mention, so for example, if you are a web tester that's working with C# technologies or JavaScript technologies, you can easily try to move on to the Unity, because the Unity engine using JavaScript and C# as a scripting languages, so it will be easier for you. But not to Unreal Engine, because it uses C++ and Bash.
Okay, thanks for your answers, Alexander. We are actually out of time, but we have several questions remaining. We will answer them in the follow-up to this session. So stay tuned for that. And I also wanted to take a moment to announce our next speech, handled for internal company audience, which will be related to medical devices testing and compliance by Max Dorofeyev. This event will take place tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ukrainian time. On that note, have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Alexander, for the great speech. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.